she rubbed her scent on the human captain. Now no other female dares to claim him. The transport ship Horizon descended through the swirling azure atmosphere of Elysium 9 with a practiced smoothness that spoke of its captain's steady hand. From the cockpit, Glenn Tate could see the planet's twin moons hanging low over a horizon of shimmering blue-green spires. At first glance, they seemed like glass towers catching the sun, but as he adjusted the view filters, he realized they were alive, vast organic growths woven into structures that reached toward the sky like frozen lightning. The entire capital seemed to breathe with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a living thing. It was beautiful in a way no human city could replicate, a kind of deliberate artistry that made his own homeworld steel and concrete feel cold and static. The ship settled onto the docking pad with a hiss of hydraulics. Glenn exhaled, loosening his shoulders. 3 weeks in deep space had left him running on muscle memory and ration coffee, and he expected the formalities of a diplomatic handoff to be the most taxing part of his day. Supplies delivered, hands shaken, maybe a ceremonial meal then. Back into the black, when the airlock cycled open and he stepped into the warm, faintly humid air of the Alysium spaceport, he expected a small delegation in dress uniforms. Instead, there was only one figure waiting at the bottom of the ramp. She was tall, her posture a blend of fluid grace and quiet authority. Armor of black and silver hugged her frame, marked by scratches that spoke of battles fought and won. Her skin was the soft blue of a summer sky just before dusk, with a subtle shimmer that caught the light when she moved. Her silver-white hair was braided in twin strands that framed her face, and her eyes, pale, luminous, and fixed entirely on him, made the hairs at the back of his neck stand on end. "Captain Glenn Tate of the United Earth Coalition," she said, voice warm yet edged with command. "I am Commander Fila Caveth of the Nari Defense Force. I will be your liaison during your stay on Elysium 9. Glenn offered his hand in the human fashion. "Pleasure to meet you, Commander." She didn't take it. Instead, she pressed a fist to her chest in a sharp, deliberate salute. "The diplomatic reception has been postponed. I will escort you to your quarters and brief you on our customs." As they walked, the city unfolded in living detail outside the transport pod's transparent canopy buildings that seemed to grow from the earth. Gardens suspended in air, waterways threading between structures like veins. But the beauty was marred by the looks they drew. Female Nari glanced their way, eyes lingering on Glenn with open appraisal, their gazes sharp and measuring. Some exchanged looks, subtle tilts of the head, whispers that vanished in the hum of the pod dot when they stepped into the diplomatic residence's atrium. A tall Nari woman with deep purple skin and sharp, angular features intercepted them. "Commander Caveth," she purred, though her eyes never left Glenn. "Is this the human pilot I've heard about?" Perhaps he'd appreciate a tour from someone more experienced with Outworlders. Before Glenn could respond, Fila moved between them in a single smooth step. Without warning, she turned toward him and pressed her cheek to his shoulder, then slowly rubbed along the curve of his neck. Her skin was warm, the contact lingering, deliberate, and unmistakably intimate. There was a faint scent in the air, something like cinnamon laced with ozone, clinging to his skin where she touched him. The purple-skinned officer froze mid-breath. Her eyes narrowed, lips tightening into a smile that didn't reach her. "Gaze." "Of course, Commander," she said softly, retreating with feline grace. Glenn stood there, pulse thudding in his ears. He wasn't sure what had just happened, but he knew it hadn't been casual. The warmth of her touch still burned on his skin, the scent marking him in a way he didn't yet understand. And as Fila stepped back, face unreadable, he realized the simple handoff mission he'd expected was already gone, replaced by something far stranger and far more personal. The diplomatic reception hall of the Nari High Council glowed like the inside of a living jewel. Light drifted down from orbs suspended high in the vaulted ceiling, casting ripples across the curved walls as if the entire space were underwater. The air carried a faint floral sweetness, overlaid with something sharper like metal warmed in. Sunlight. Glenn adjusted the collar of his midnight blue dress uniform, the fabric suddenly feeling tight across his shoulders. The uniform's silver trim caught the glow from the orbs, marking him out against the darker shades of the Nari attendants moving in the periphery. Beside him, Fila stood in ceremonial armor that gleamed with a softer, almost liquid sheen. Silver. Plates curved along her form, traced with threads of bioluminescence that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. The effect was hypnotic, the glow drawing the eye to the strong lines of her stance, to the way her chin lifted in confidence. Glenn told himself he was cataloging details for diplomatic purposes, but he was uncomfortably aware of how close she stood, close enough that the faint scent from the day before lingered, a subtle halo around him. "Stop fidgeting," she murmured, without turning her head, "just making sure I look acceptable." He replied, keeping his voice low. "You do," she said, and though the words were flat, there was a faint deepening of color along her cheekbones, a blush in Nari tones. Before he could press the point, an attendant's voice rang out. "Captain Glenn Tate of the United Earth Coalition and Commander Fila Caveth of the Nari Defense Force." They stepped forward together. The gathered crowd, warriors in decorated armor, robed diplomats, and civilians in flowing fabrics, turned as one to regard them. Glenn felt the weight of every gaze, most of them from Nari women. Their eyes traveled over him in frank appraisal, their expressions ranging from interest to something more predatory. Each time one began to drift closer, Fila shifted subtly, adjusting her stance so that her arm brushed his or her shoulder blocked their line of approach. It was done with the ease of long habit, as if she were moving pieces on a board no one else could see. High Commander Caveth approached, broad-shouldered and imposing, his skin a deep shade of navy. "We are honored by your presence," he said, eyes flicking briefly between them. "I see Commander Caveth has ensured your comfort." Glenn caught the knowing edge in the older warrior's voice. Before he could reply, Fila said, "Captain Tate and I will be working closely on the Joint Defense Initiative." Her tone was steady, but he felt her shift closer until her arm brushed his again. The reception became a slow orbit of conversation and subtle power plays. Female officers found reasons to linger within arm's reach, their hands grazing his sleeve as they spoke. A diplomat leaned in to explain a piece of art and let her fingers rest lightly on his forearm. At each instance, Fila appeared sometimes, with a hand resting firmly on his shoulder, sometimes with the faintest brush of her cheek to his sleeve, as if adjusting her stance. Her scent renewed itself each time, ghosting over his senses in a way that made his skin prick. When they finally slipped into the quiet curve of an alcove, Glenn exhaled. "All right," he said, voice a low growl of frustration and amusement. "Are you going to tell me what's going on? Every woman in this room looks at me like I'm the last piece of chocolate in the galaxy, and you're acting like a bodyguard with a grudge." Fila's luminous eyes narrowed slightly. "You researched our customs?" "I tried." The database was annoyingly vague. A soft exhale escaped her, almost a sigh. Nari females are territorial, especially during certain cycles. When I marked you yesterday, it was instinct. His brow arched. "So you claimed me like property." "Not property," she said sharply, leaning in so her voice was a whisper between them. "The marking indicates compatibility. It's a warning to others that negotiations are underway." His lips quirked. "And do I get a say in these negotiations?" The corner of her mouth lifted, just barely. "You didn't push me away, Captain." Heat prickled at the back of his neck as memory replayed, the press of her against him, his hands finding her waist without conscious thought. "I was caught off guard. were you?" she asked, her voice dipping lower, eyes steady on his. Your pupils dilated, your heart rate increased, your body temperature rose, all human indicators of attraction. "You've been studying human physiology?" "Thoroughly," she said, and the word carried both science and something else. "Entirely." The air between them thickened. Somewhere across the room, movement caught her eye. "Lieutenant Terrace is watching," she murmured. "She still believes she can challenge my claim. And if she did? Traditionally?" "Combat," Fila said, a flicker of a smile curling. Her lips. "But there are other ways to reinforce a claim." Before he could ask, she closed the space between them and kissed him. It began as a statement of possession, hard and deliberate, but it softened almost instantly into something deeper. Glenn's breath caught, his hands finding her waist as though the gesture were inevitable. Around them, the reception stilled. For a heartbeat, a ripple of whispers following them as they drew apart. That, Glenn said, slightly breathless, was direct. Her eyes gleamed. "The negotiations have advanced, Captain Tate." He met her gaze and said, "Glenn, if we're negotiating, use my name." She tested it on her tongue. "Glenn." Then, as the crowd began to stir again, she added, "Perhaps we should continue this cultural exchange somewhere less public." She tested it on her tongue. "Glenn." Then, as the crowd began to stir again, she added, "Perhaps we should continue this cultural exchange somewhere less public." And in the depths of her voice, he heard both the promise of danger and something far more personal. The first light of Elysium's twin moons filtered through the translucent walls of Fila's quarters, casting the room in soft amber and silver. Glenn lay awake, his gaze tracing the shifting patterns across the ceiling, while the steady rhythm of Fila's breathing filled the space beside him. Her silver-white hair spilled across the pillow, strands catching the dawnlight like fine wire. The night had been educational. Whatever he'd thought cultural exchange might entail, it hadn't come close to the reality. Two species learning each other's strengths, sensitivities, and rhythms in equal measure. There had been awkward laughter at first, then wordless current pulling them into something deeper than instinct or politics. Fila stirred, blinking awake to find him watching her. A faint smile curved her lips as she reached up and traced the line of his jaw. "You're staring." "Admiring," he corrected. "Your skin catches the light differently than ours." "It's beautiful." Her smile deepened for an instant, but then her eyes sharpened. "How do you feel this morning, Captain? Any regrets about our negotiations?" "None whatsoever," Glenn said, propping himself on one elbow. "Oh, I'm still not entirely clear on the terms." Her expression shifted to something more solemn. "Among my people, what we shared last night is not casual. It's a bond not marriage in her terms, but a commitment. Hard to break and highly visible. Does that concern you?" "Should it? Should it?" She countered, searching his. Eyes dot before either could say more. A piercing alert tone cut through the stillness. They both reached for their devices. Voices from Defense Command overlapping in urgent bursts. "Emergency briefing in 30 minutes, Fila read, already. Swinging her legs out of bed. "Senior officers only." Glenn scanned his own device. "Draconid activity detected at system edge. Looks like a scout formation." In minutes, the intimacy of the night was replaced by the brisk, silent efficiency of soldiers preparing for duty. Fila's ceremonial armor was traded for the matte finish plating of a combat commander. Her braid tightened with swift, practiced motions. Glenn slipped back into his flight suit, the scent she'd left on him still clinging faintly, almost defiantly. Before they left, she paused, fastening the last clasp on her chest plate. "You should know. My claiming you wasn't just about attraction or keeping rivals away. High Command sees human Nari bonds as politically valuable. A visible pairing strengthens the idea of unity. His hands stilled over his gloves. So, last night was what, a political maneuver? No, she said sharply. The attraction is real. That was mine. But yes, they were pleased, and they encouraged me not to resist it. Glenn let the silence stretch for a moment, then tucked the conversation away. We'll finish this later. Right now, we have a job to do. The command center was already alive with movement when they arrived. Tactical holograms displayed. A wedge formation of Draconid scout sleek, predator-shaped vessels moving steadily through the void. High Commander Caveth's gaze was locked on the main display, while Lieutenant Terrace stood at his side, her purple skin catching the cold. Light. Our long-range sensors picked up the formation 6 hours ago, Terrace reported smoothly. Search pattern matches standard pre-invasion reconnaissance. Show me their trajectory, Glenn said, stepping forward. As the data flickered into being, his eyes narrowed. The movement was too obvious, too direct. They want to be seen, he murmured. Draconids are ambush predators. This open approach is wrong. Fila glanced at him. Meaning? Meaning this is a lure. They're drawing your attention here, while the real force comes in another way, likely masked by the star's interference. We used the same trick against the Arcturans. Caveth gave a sharp nod. Recalibrate sensor arrays for solar approach vectors. Commander Caveth, Captain Tate, you'll intercept. If you're right, we need proof. The hangar smelled faintly of ozone and hot metal as they strapped into a sleek Nari interceptor. Glenn's hands settled on the controls like old friends. The HUD painting vector data in alien but readable patterns. As the launch clamps released, the ship roared into open space, slicing toward the inner system. They found the truth within minutes. 30 Draconid ships, including a carrier, emerging. From behind the sun, like shadows uncoiling. Command, this is Interceptor 7, Fila transmitted. We've confirmed full battle group. Solar approach confirmed. The reply came crackling through static. Defense fleet mobilizing. Return to base immediately. A flash of light lit the cockpit as a blast grazed their port side. Warning screamed. Glenn banked hard, energy fire raking the black where they'd been a heartbeat before. Port engine hit. We're not making it back to Alysium 9. Emergency landing Phoebe's second moon. It's barely habitable, Fila warned. Better than dust, Glenn gritted out, fighting the controls as the gray surface of Phoebe swelled in the viewport. The impact came in a jarring grind of metal and dust. Silence followed, broken only by the ping of cooling systems. They were alive, but cut off. And somewhere behind them, the Draconid fleet was already moving toward Elysium's heart. Phoebe's surface stretched in every direction like an ocean of ash and stone, broken only by the looming curve of Elysium, the gas giant filling half the black sky. Glenn and Fila moved with the deliberate pace the thin atmosphere and reduced gravity demanded, packs of emergency supplies strapped across their shoulders. Their breath rasped in their helmets, each step sending pale dust curling up to drift. Lazily before settling back to the ground, according to Fila's tactical pad, the research outpost lay 20 kilometers to the north, an automated facility. Abandoned for months, but still equipped with a comm array powerful enough to cut through. The Draconid jamming. Glenn calculated the distance in human terms. A full day's hike in this terrain. The numbers didn't comfort him. For hours they trekked in silence, the tension between them thicker than the air. The conversation they'd had in her quarters still lingered about politics, about the purpose of her claim, about the bond being both real and strategically useful. Glenn's mind replayed her words, even as his eyes scanned the horizon for movement. When the jagged shadow of a cave came into view against a low ridge, Fila signaled a halt. Night cycle is approaching. The temperature will drop hard and fast. We'll take shelter here. Inside, The darkness pressed close, broken only by the small sphere of warmth from the portable heater. They shed helmets, but kept the rest of their suits sealed against the chill. Glenn busied himself unfolding thermal blankets while Fila studied. The tactical pad. "I've been thinking about what you said," she said finally, "about my marking you having political weight." Glenn glanced up, and, "You were right to be angry. I should have told you High Command saw strategic value in our pairing. But there's something you need to understand. Nari females can't mark males they feel nothing for. It's biological. Our pheromones don't trigger without genuine interest." His brow furrowed. "So you're saying politics or not, you couldn't have faked it." "Precisely." She hesitated, then placed a hand on his arm. "What happened between us on Alysium? Here it was real. The political advantage was an afterthought." Glenn studied her face, noting the steadiness in her gaze. "I believe you," he said at last. Then his voice hardened. "But there's something else. The Draconids knew exactly where to find us." "That's not luck." Her eyes narrowed. "You think there's a traitor?" "I think Lieutenant Terrace was too interested in our patrol route during the briefing, and the attack came too fast to be coincidence." Fila's jaw tightened. "She's served for years. That would make her the perfect mole." Glenn pulled up the mission data on his own pad. 8 minutes before launch, our intercept course was transmitted to all senior staff. Plenty of time for her to send it out. They fell silent again, the only sound the soft hum of the heater. Outside, the temperature dropped into the lethal range. They drew the blankets around them and lay close for warmth, the shared heat both. Necessity and comfort. "If we survive this," Glenn said quietly, "what happens with us?" "Beyond the politics. Beyond the war." Fila's hand found his under the covers. "Among my people, a claiming is not easily undone, and I wouldn't wish it to be. Even with human unpredictability." He gave a low chuckle. "Reckless stubbornness." "You mean?" "That too," she murmured, shifting closer until their forehead rested against his. "Rest. Tomorrow we reach the outpost, expose Terrace, and save Elysium 9. The faint light from the heater painted their faces in warm tones, but at the cave's mouth the black sky pulsed with distant flashes, the battle still raging above. The gas giant. Glenn closed his eyes, knowing that whatever awaited them at the outpost would decide not only the planet's fate, but the future of the bond neither of them had planned for, yet both now carried like a shared heartbeat. Dawn on Phoebe was more a shifting of shadows than a true sunrise, the gas giant's pale light smearing across the horizon in muted gray. Glenn and Fila crouched low behind a jagged ridge, eyes fixed on the research outpost nestled in the shallow crater below. Its dome-shaped structure was pitted with micrometeorite scars, but the communication arrays jutting from its roof still stood like skeletal towers. Glenn lifted his tactical binoculars. 4 Draconids. 2 at the main entrance, 2 circling. The perimeter. Their reptilian forms moved with the precise economy of predator-scaled armor plates flexing, weapons cradled loosely but ready. "Advanced scouts," Fila said grimly. "They're using the outpost as a forward base. And if they've accessed the comm systems, they'll have a direct link to the invasion fleet," Glenn finished. "We need to clear them fast and quiet." Fila's silver braid shifted as she glanced sideways at him. "I can take the entrance guards if you handle the patrol." He smirked faintly. "Confident in my abilities, Commander?" "I've seen what those human muscles can do," she said, and there was a spark in her voice that had nothing to do with tactics. They split without another word, circling in opposite directions. Glenn shadowed the patrolling pair, studying. Their movements efficient, predictable, just as he remembered from the Centauri border conflict. He waited until they passed the far side of the dome, then burst from cover. The first Draconid barely had time to register movement before Glenn's combat knife slid beneath the plates of its jaw, severing the spine. The second spun weapon, rising, but Glenn dropped low, rolling beneath the crackling energy burst. He came up inside the creature's guard, driving a hard strike to the vulnerable scales at its throat. The Draconid staggered back, choking, before collapsing to the dust dot across the crater. Fila moved like a blade made flesh. She flowed between her targets in a deadly rhythm, her curved Nari sword flashing once, twice both entrance guards crumpling before they had a chance to cry out. She met his gaze and gave a sharp nod. Clear dot inside. The outpost was dim and cold, the hum of dormant systems echoing faintly through the corridors. They moved toward the central hub, weapons ready, but found no other resistance. The command center lay ahead, a circular room filled with consoles and a towering array. Good. News and bad news, Glenn said after scanning the systems. Arrays intact, but Draconids have a system-wide jamming field in place. We can punch through it with a tight beam transmission, but only once before they trace the signal. Target the defense headquarters on Alysium 9, Fila. Sighed, Glenn's fingers flew across the controls. The display flickered, then resolved into the face of a young Nari officer, expression tense. Outpost Phoebe 3, identify yourselves. Captain Glenn Tate, United Earth Coalition. Commander Fila Caveth, Nari Defense Force, Priority 1. The officer's eyes widened. Stand by. The screen went dark for a heartbeat before another face appeared, this one pale with stress. High Commander Caveth is unavailable, the junior officer said hesitantly. Lieutenant Terrace has assumed temporary command. She claims the High Commander was compromised by human influence. She's ordered all human personnel confined, and any Nari marked by humans detained for decontamination. Fila's expression iced over. That's pheromone purging, she hissed. It can be fatal. Glenn leaned forward. She's the traitor. We have proof security logs showing encrypted transmissions from her quarters to an unregistered receiver at the system's edge. Timestamps matched Draconid fleet movements. The officer hesitated, then quickly transmitted a string of access codes. These will link your systems to the Council's network. Many of us still believe in the Alliance. Don't give up on us. The feed cut. Data began streaming into the outpost systems. Glenn filtered for encrypted logs and pulled them onto his pad, highlighting the damning transmissions. This is enough to take her down. Fila stepped close to read over his shoulder. Her scent, sharp and warm, curled through the air between them. We have to deliver it ourselves, publicly. If she controls the channels, any quiet report will vanish. Glenn's eyes met hers. Then we make it impossible to bury. We walk into the heart of the city and drop it on the council floor. It will be dangerous, she warned. He allowed himself a grin. Good. I'd hate for this to be easy. She held his gaze for a long moment, then, without warning, pulled him into a fierce kiss-fast, urgent, tasting of resolve and something unspoken. When she broke away, her eyes burned. By Nari custom, what we share means you are mine, and I am yours. Whatever happens, that doesn't change. Where I'm from, Glenn said, his voice low, we call that till death do us part. They didn't waste another word. The shuttle in the outpost bay still had fuel. As Glenn powered it up, the thought crystallized in his mind. This wasn't just about clearing his name or exposing a traitor. If they failed, the planet and their bond would both be ash under the Draconid fleet. The shuttle skimmed low over Alysium 9's sprawling landscape, hugging valleys and cutting between towering living spires to avoid patrol sensors. Glenn's hands were steady on the controls, his eyes scanning the terrain ahead, but his mind kept circling the same thought. Once they touched down, There would be no turning back. Fila stood beside him at the tactical console, her gaze fixed on the shifting display of enemy movements and defensive positions. Terrace has locked down the council quarter with a security cordon. Biometric scanners at every checkpoint. Calibrated for what? Glenn asked, though he already suspected. For Nari females carrying human biochemical traces. Fila sighed, her voice tight. She's using our bond to flush me out. And you with me. He glanced up at her, catching the faint blush along her high cheekbones. They both remembered the long night on Phoebe, how recent contact would make the biochemical signal even stronger. Then we don't hide it, Glenn said. We use it. Her silver brows drew together. You're suggesting we walk straight into her net. I'm suggesting we land in the central plaza, call every civilian and officer within earshot, and lay the evidence at the council's feet, in the open, with every camera on us. It's reckless, she said flatly. It's human, he countered. Minutes later, the shuttle's landing struts touched down on the smooth stone of the central plaza. A crowd had already begun to form, rippling with murmurs as the side hatch opened and Glenn and Fila emerged side by side. The scent she carried drifted outward, subtle but unmistakable to the Nari in the square. Some voices rose in support, others hissed in disapproval. A line of armed security officers stepped forward, their leader announcing, Commander Caveth, you are ordered to report for decontamination. The human will be detained. Glenn ignored him, raising his voice so it carried over the plaza. People of Alysium 9, you've been told that bonds between humans and Nari are corruption, that they weaken you, while you argue over purity. The Draconids are burning through our defenses, using codes your lieutenant gave them. Fila stepped forward, holding the datapad aloft. We have proof-encrypted transmissions from Lieutenant Terrace to the Draconid fleet, timed to our weakest moments. The crowd stirred, uncertain, and then the council doors banged open. Terrace strode out flanked by guards, her violet skin darkening with fury. They're lying. This human has clouded her judgment, turned her against her own people. Is that what happened? Came a deeper voice. High Commander Caveth pushed through the crowd, limping but unbowed. His eyes locked on Terrace. Or did you stage coup while I defended our orbital platforms? Did you feed our enemy the keys to our shield? Her composure cracked. I did what was necessary to preserve the Nari way, to preserve your power, Caveth snapped. Guards detain her. Even as Terrace was dragged away, a shrill alert swept across the plaza. Glenn turned to see the shimmering dome of the planetary shield above them flicker and shudder under heavy impact. The fleet's here, Fila said grimly. They followed Caveth at a run into the Defense Command Center, where displays showed the Draconid ships battering the shield. 62% and falling, a technician called. They're targeting our weak points, using the codes they stole. Then we turn their advantage against them, Glenn said, stepping to the main display. Reconfigure the grid to make those weak points look worse than they are. Funnel them through honeypot corridors, Fila finished, catching his intent instantly. Trap zones for concentrated fire. Caveth hesitated only a second before nodding. Do it. Glenn's fingers flew over the controls, remapping the shield structure with intuitive leaps the Nari techs hadn't considered. Fila worked. Beside him, her knowledge of the system's intricacies meshing with his tactical creativity. Then she straightened suddenly. There's something else. The pheromone signature Terrace is scanning for. It's ours. Unique. We could use it as an encryption key for all tactical comms. They'll be listening for old codes, not this. Glenn looked at her, realization dawning. We'd have two. Amplify it through the broadcast array. That means physical contact, she said, eyes never leaving his. Without hesitation, he stepped in, pressing his forehead to hers. She slid her arms around his waist, the intimacy drawing startled. Glances from the surrounding crew. Calibrating array to unique signature, a tech reported. Ready to transmit. The broadcast pulsed out, and within seconds, the effect rippled through the Draconid fleet. Their comms fractured, ships drifting out of formation or colliding in confusion. The first wave of attackers funneled straight into the honeypot corridors, where concentrated Nari firepower tore them apart. On the main display, the massive Draconid command carrier hesitated, then began a slow retreat, leaving wreckage burning in the upper atmosphere. Cheers erupted around them. Glenn and Fila broke apart, breathless, their foreheads still nearly touching. "Did we just save a planet by hugging?" Glenn asked, voice low with incredulity. Fila's lips curved in a rare, unguarded smile. "It seems we did." 3 days. Later, as the city's lights shimmered in the dusk, Glenn stood with her on the balcony of the diplomatic quarters. "Coalition's making me permanent liaison," he said. "If that's all right with you." Her hand slid into his, fingers, warm and sure. She leaned in, rubbing her cheek against his neck in that now familiar gesture. But this time her voice was soft, almost playful. "Mine." He turned to her, his own smile slow and certain. "Yours, and you're mine." Below them, the capital gleamed, no longer just a symbol of two worlds meeting, but proof of what they could build together.